Hello, this is the sermon for the fourth Sunday in Lent, and the text I preached on is 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 to 13. In today's story from the first book of Samuel, the prophet Samuel learns that God's ways are not our ways. Samuel goes to Bethlehem in order to anoint one of the sons of Jesse as the next king of Israel, in order to replace Saul, whom God had rejected as king over Israel. Samuel looks at Eliab, who is first to be presented, and presumably Jesse's eldest son, and thinks, "Surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance, or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Now, funnily enough, when God tells Samuel to anoint Jesse's youngest son, David, we aren't told what God sees in David's heart, but we are told of David's outward appearance. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. So we may laugh at the irony of this. The two books of Samuel go on to tell David's story. We don't learn what God first saw in David, but we do learn that, although he is far from perfect, David remains faithful to God all his life. But perhaps the most important part of today's story is that Samuel learns that the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Mortals today continue to mistakenly look at the outward appearance of other people. Humans have a tendency to make snap judgments about other people, and we often make such judgments even before the other person has had a chance to try to make a first impression. We make such judgments on the basis of our own pre-existing biases and prejudices instead. The evils of racism and sexism are largely driven by the tendency to make snap judgments based on outward appearance. Some people unconsciously assume that other people are inferior because they have a different skin color or gender than that of the person making the assumption. But making assumptions about other people based on their outward appearance is not limited to avowed racists or sexists. We all tend to make snap judgments about other people based on our unconscious biases, and the fact that we are by definition unaware of this makes it especially pernicious. It is true that sometimes we can perceive something about someone by intuition, but for the most part, the habit of judging by outward appearance misleads rather than reveals. In contrast with mortals, who make judgments based on outward appearance, God looks on the heart. God does not make snap judgments based on unconscious biases, like we so often do. Instead, God sees people for who they truly are. God knows us better than we know ourselves. That God sees us for who we truly are can be at once frightening and comforting. It can be frightening because it means that God sees through our pretenses and our illusions. God is not fooled by the self that we project into the outside world to protect our inner vulnerable self. God is not deceived by the lies we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. What can be comforting about God's insight into our true selves is that if we can learn to lower our defenses before God, we can know ourselves to be truly accepted and loved by God for who we truly are. We don't have to put on figurative masks to be accepted by God, the way we do in order to be accepted by others, even by our nearest and dearest. We can be ourselves with God. As Christians, we are called to do our best to see others as God sees them, to look on the heart rather than judge by outward appearance. Of course, this is easier said than done, as the history of how Christians have treated and continue to treat people different from themselves shows. As humans, we will always tend to make snap judgments about other people based on biases and prejudices about which we are mostly unaware. In part, this can't be helped because we have been hardwired to make such snap judgments by millennia of evolution in order to ensure our survival. In order to look on the heart as God does, we need to reject the old saw that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. In any encounter with someone, we need to start by acknowledging that our first impression of them is probably inaccurate, or at least incomplete. Sometimes this is all that we need to do, as with superficial encounters, such as when you exchange pleasantries with the clerk who is checking out your groceries. In more meaningful encounters, we need to be willing to set aside our first impression of someone and get to know them better. The practice of looking on the heart is most important in our relationships with people whom we think we already know well. In such cases, we need to adopt postures of openness and curiosity. There is always something more we can learn, even about our loved ones whom we see every day. The benefit of looking on the heart, as God does, is that it enriches our relationships with others. The better we learn to look on the heart, the more fulfilling our relationships will be. We will get more enjoyment out of our interactions with others. But most importantly of all, looking on the heart is one of the best ways we have of fulfilling the second great commandment, to love our neighbors as ourselves. For, as the first letter of John reminds us, those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. To learn to look on the heart is to learn to love others as God loves us, and so to be obedient to the will of God.